Welcome to the Diary of Discovery, the podcast where we delve deep into the human experience of healing and transformation. I'm your host, Jacky Clark, and each week we will sit down with inspiring individuals who have embarked on their own personal journeys of healing and self-discovery. From overcoming trauma to navigating life's challenges, our guests share their raw and honest stories, offering insights, wisdom, and hope to all who tune in. So grab your favorite cup of tea, find a cozy spot, and join us as we uncover the power of resilience, courage, and the pursuit of authenticity. This is the Diary of Discovery. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am super excited to be with our next guest. Same hemisphere as me, but on the other side of the world, which is always really, really fun. So do you want to tell everyone who you are and where you are in the world?
Absolutely. My name is Ceri. I'm a clinical nutritionist, inner work coach, and natural living enthusiast. I'm based in Brisbane, so in Queensland, Australia, but I've lived in 3 different places within Australia. So I was born in Perth, which is a lot closer to you, and then moved via Melbourne, which is where a lot of my story takes place, and then up to sunny Queensland, where I have found the energy up here absolutely excellent for all types of healing journeys. So I think that that's a nice place to be in terms of the start of our conversation today. And thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. Oh, it's only a pleasure. Australia is still on the list of places I want to come and visit, so I will be putting Queensland on the list. Let's go. So
Definitely do.
you obviously know we're here to talk about your healing journey. And as everyone knows on the podcast who's listened for a while now, we always start at the beginning. So if you can take us back to the moment that you feel like your journey started for you and like what was going on, what kind of kick-started this healing process for you?
And I think it's really interesting to reflect on it as we get older and find maybe the little seeds that started the journey before the journey, if that makes sense. I have always thought to myself that my healing journey really started when I was in my early 20s, but I definitely remember there being little seeds of things collected before that. For example, when I was 15, I discovered online blogs. This was quite some time ago. And I learned a little bit about what I wanted to do in the world and decided I wanted to pursue health. And my journey took a really huge detour, which I'll tell you in a moment. I am so grateful though that I discovered blogging and the whole world of sharing your story online, and that I already had started to, albeit in a very destructive way, dive into health, because I then was able to circle back and pick up to continue my healing journey in the future. As a teenage girl, I really struggled with body image, self-doubt, feeling different, feeling not exiled, but on the outer of the social groups. I'd kind of flip between different social groups and not really ever feel like I really fit in. And what ultimately ended up happening was I found a group of friends where we were in the party scene. And I was working really, really hard to try and prove myself. And on the weekends, we'd go out and party and take drugs and drink and all these things and felt really connected. And I loved it. And I was obsessed. And I was moonlighting as a music journalist and had a hospitality job and a full-time job. And I was studying and I was doing all the things. And it was really a matter of burning the candle from the inside out as well as from both ends, right? And one thing led to another. And I found myself in my early 20s with a pretty significant drug habit. And for me, it wasn't about going out and partying, getting really high and taking myself into an altered state. It was the time that I felt either connected to people, or it was the time when I felt that my brain was in the right frame to study or to get through my to-do list or to clean my house or any of these things. And anyone listening is probably going to start connecting the dots here. And so I went through a really bad breakup of the boyfriend that I was with at the time, and I actually still have him in my life, and I would reach out and say thank you for starting me on this journey if I felt the need. But he really broke my heart. And I spent probably 6 months getting more and more into the drug habit and the drinking and the working to really cope with what I was feeling. At the same time, I got kicked out of uni, of course, and my dad died, which was devastating because I hadn't had him in my life for a lot of my life. And I just started to get to know him properly and realize how I fit into my family and how I felt more connected to him and that side of the family than I did to my mum and her side of the family. And I started putting the pieces together of, oh, hang on, this is where I fit in. But then, of course, that led to even more questions. And I wasn't quite ready to deal with that. And it took me another couple of years where I was using Class A drugs daily. I was living with my dealer. I was working full time, studying full time, like really doing everything that I could to just achieve. And it wasn't about partying, like I said, but I had just burned out so badly and I was so unwell that I literally was bleeding from the eyes like stigmata at one point because they were so infected, because I was completely immune deficient. I was really not sleeping very often. I was, hallucinating at various times. And, I had this delusion that I had everything under control. Of course, I didn't have everything under control. And I was just so depressed that I knew that I could really not get any further through, this is essentially a rock bottom, dark night of the soul kind of moment. And in that moment, I figured that the best thing for me to do was to get out of a cold, toxic environment of where I was in Melbourne and find myself some sunshine, find myself a new group of people, and spend my energy getting well again. And before I was able to actually take that leap, I found something called health coaching. And so I signed up for this course, and something within me just knew that I was going to find the vehicle for my own healing in that. And I felt like a fraud at the start because I was still using drugs, but learning the very first fundamentals of health coaching and holistic nutrition. And of course, it blew my mind. And around about the same time, I went to the GP because I was very clearly unwell. And she actually asked me why it was that I was using drugs. And when I told her about how my brain finally felt like I could do things in that time, she referred me for ADHD testing. And lo and behold, it's something that also runs in my family. So at 25, I found out that I have ADHD. And everything unlocked from there. So it was a lot in a very short period of time.
Amazing. Okay, so that is, that's a lot. Like, that's a lot for a person to go through, to have, that burnout in itself is a lot. Drug addiction is a lot. Losing your father is a lot. Like, trying to find out who you are in the world. Like, it's all a lot. And when you were going through that process and you said like you realized you needed to take yourself out of that environment, like find a warmer, like sunnier, healthier, like place to be in the world, what did you have to accept about yourself and like get to know about yourself in order to go on that journey?
That's a really great question. I really love that. I first had to accept that I deserved a better outcome and that it was within my reach if only I took the leap. And I know through a lot of the work that I've done with clients over the last few years that those things in themselves can be the hugest roadblocks for a lot of people. And no one's ever asked me that before. I just have full body goosebumps. I love that question. I also had to recognize that I allowed myself to get to that point, which when we talk about things like, radical personal responsibility, it can be really confronting for people. And so I sometimes feel or felt, not so much these days, but felt for a long time this kind of addict's guilt that I've done things which are not in line with my values. I've done things that have hurt people. I've done things which have disappointed myself and people around me. And we have to accept some level of self-compassion as well in the mix of that, knowing that we know better now and can then act differently.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so challenging when you're in that state, whether it is depression, burnout, like to picture something better, to picture something different, to believe that actually I am worth more, I can have more. Like your brain is so good at tricking you into believing that what you're in and what you're living and how you're existing and what is available to you is all that is available to you. And it's such a slippery slope when you start going down that thing of connecting your self-worth to things. And that idea of, I always talk about radical responsibility as well, like this idea that you have to take responsibility for the fact that you put yourself in that position. Because if you're not willing to, you're always going to live in that victim like dynamic. And that victim dynamic is never going to be the thing that helps you move forward, because the whole time you're in victim, I call it the princess analogy. Like you're waiting for somebody to save you, and the whole time you're waiting, you're just lying on a bed with your eyes closed, going, well, it'll be fine. Like, there's absolutely no responsibility and like no like moment where you actually sit up and go, actually, I can make this fine and I can do this and I can move through this. And I think the moment that you have that awareness that something needs to change, that you are the person who can change it. And actually, if you put yourself in the situation you're in now, you can get yourself out of the situation you're in now. Not easily, not quickly, not, it's not like in the Disney movies, the princess gets a kiss and suddenly her life is different. Like it's not that easy. Well, we wish it was. But there's that element of like actually the moment that you decide that something's going to be different, something changes within you. And that is, I always say, the hardest step. That moment of you actually saying, now we're going to do something different. Now I'm going to accept that, in my case, I would say to myself, like, I'm the problem. Nobody else is the problem. Like, no other situation, no other circumstance, no other influence. It's all me. Because if I say that it's all me, I have complete control over how I can change my life. And that's like, it's such a mental shift for people when you're going through that healing journey to actually get to that point. And that's why they always say, like, you can't help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves, because it's exactly that. The whole time somebody's in a victim mentality, no matter what you say, you will be the villain. No matter what you do, you will be attacking. No matter how you show up and try and help that person, they will not be receptive. So you got to that point. You decided you were going to take responsibility. You decided, you needed to do something different. And then life started to change. I'm guessing it wasn't easy. So were there moments where you thought, I can't do this, I'm not going to make it, like this is too hard, it would just be easier to go backwards?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting. As you were talking, there were so many things that really came to me. And something that I've found really significant is that I truly believe that we cannot access our idea of our best day ever or our best life ever from survival mode. And it's like we wouldn't go and wake someone up from a coma and ask if they've been living in line with their values. It is so hard to access this idea of this best life in the thick of it. And then we beat ourselves up about the fact that that's where we're at. And there have been so many times when it's felt really hard, and not so much that I wanted to go back to the way things were. Well, yes and no, actually. You know what? I'll give you a couple of examples. So a year after I'd moved to Brisbane, I still hadn't got a job. And it would have been about 9 months. And I thought that by looking up the job websites before I left, and there was 99 plus listings in my field at the time, I thought, no, this is going to be fine. And then I moved up here and there was maybe a dozen at most. And the bottom had dropped out of the industry and I was distraught. I thought, okay, well, I feel like this has gone so badly already. I've got no job. I'm living in a studio apartment with this boyfriend that has been long distance for a while, and I'm healing and I feel pretty rotten, right? And so I got a cafe job and just focused on my health coaching certificate and meeting new people and writing my blog and, all of the little bits and pieces. And it was so hard. And I was on government support, and part of that requirement was applying for 20 jobs a fortnight. So you think of the effort that goes into a job application and 20 times over just to have enough money to pay my rent. And getting no. And then I finally just bit the bullet and actually invested in a business networking event franchise. It was just a few $100s. I borrowed it from my boyfriend. And I started running my own business networking events. I thought, if I don't have a network that can help me get a job, then I'm going to do it myself. And I think I was really naive in that, but I was also really ballsy. By taking matters into my own hands, I created something for myself that I wouldn't have had before. And I'm not sure if anyone resonates with the idea that you have a bit of a test from the universe before something kind of goes your way. So I went back to Melbourne for a few weeks and partied, essentially, got back into all my old habits. And I felt so awful, like not in a moral sense, but like I felt really unwell. Like my body was telling me this was no longer something that was in alignment for me. And I got really, really sick. And I was recovering from that and going through the application, well, not the application process, but the onboarding process for my dream job. And they reached out to me and I thought it was a joke, or I thought it was a scam. And then it turns out it was actually the recruitment person from what I would have called my number one marquee brand that I wanted to work for. And it took me 8 weeks to get through the interview process, at which point I was still on government support and trying to run my business events and still living in a studio apartment and still feeling pretty miserable. And I started that job and I thought that my life was going to change. And over the year, I grew so much. I learned so much. I found an amazing community of people. I found friends that I've still got to this day. And what I found was that I didn't want to work for my dream job. And so I went back to finish my health degree and walked away from probably the biggest opportunity of my life because it didn't feel right anymore. And when I did that, I knew that I was giving up something quite substantial, and I was. And what I gave up, I had to make up in terms of income. So I was studying, working for myself. I had a few coaching clients, but ultimately I was back on a student wage. And by this point, my boyfriend and I had gotten engaged and we were saving up for a wedding. And so I ended up getting a part-time government contract. And there's nothing more boring than that. So I was really, really struggling. Hadn't quite figured out how having ADHD meant my brain worked in terms of dopamine and engagement and all those things. And so I literally felt like my soul was being sucked out of me every day. And so what I did was took on too much outside of work to make up for it, and I burned out again. And what I was not doing at the time was noticing my feelings and how misaligned my relationship was. Because we got married, and then 6 weeks, well, less than that, 6 weeks later, he had tapped out. So we got married at Christmas, and on our honeymoon, probably within a month, I knew that something was wrong. And he went away for 3 weeks for work, straight from our honeymoon. And during that time, I knew that he was unfaithful. And so when he came back to Australia, from there, the next few months were a process of separation and him moving out and me realizing that I don't have a job, studying, my contract's finished, this person's going to support me, and now I'm doing clinical placement and have rent to pay by myself and another layer of healing to do all at the same time. And you mentioned before, there's kind of enough stuff that's happened already in my healing journey that you think, okay, well, that's probably, pick one or two things. But no, the universe says, let's just do it all at once and get it out of the way. And so this was another episode of that, where it's, okay, you're going to finish your degree, no stress. But we're going to put some obstacles along the way just to make sure that you just get everything kind of out and done. So at that point, I found the modality that I coach in at the moment. And as a client, I jumped into that like my life depended on it, like it was my job. And through that process, it also uncovered a lot of really, really deep healing that was to be done. And I got really thick into that. So it was about 18 months into that when COVID happened. And I'd spent all of that time rebuilding life for myself, and then COVID happened and really threw the spanner in the works again. I was in really high level leadership in hospitality, and hospitality wasn't happening. So I really tried to refocus and found myself on the path that I am ultimately in now. But I also found my now husband, and we decided that we wanted to have family. So the process of making sure that I was well enough to do that after all of these years of burnout and drugs and alcohol and stress was a process in itself. So that level of healing began, and everything associated with emotional regulation, generational change, and really creating my own village away from my family of origin, which was not going to be a part of that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Again, just there's so many amazing things. I feel like we could discuss each of these questions for ages and ages. There's so many amazing things in this process, and it's in some ways, getting married and having a breakdown so quickly is so tragic, but in other ways you could have wasted years of your life. You could have been so much further down the path before you got to the point that you are now. Everything happens for a reason. It's just so much, isn't it? It's so much when you heal. It's never just a simple straight, this is exactly what you need to do and how it's going to work and what's going to happen. And there's a real air of just resilience in the whole journey that you're speaking about, this underlying, actually, I'm not just going to settle for where I am. I'm not just going to settle for what it is. I'm not just going to stay where I am. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to kind of go through. And I do feel when you're going through a healing journey, there is a lot of it that does almost feel like a fight. You are literally clawing your way out of where you are in the moment and getting yourself to somewhere else, somewhere better. And I think for a lot of people, when they go through this journey, they don't realize how much of a fight it's going to be, like how much they're going to have to push, how much, like how deep they're going to have to dig, how many times they're going to have to go through those feelings. And I think like once you've had that range of emotions available to you, like you felt so low, it is easy to kind of get back to that place and have that voice in your head say those stories and reiterate that stuff back to you even years after you think like you're done with that. And there's always that like person you used to be and then the person you've become, like that shift in how you exist in the world and what you believe to be true, and how you perceive things. And there's always that kind of difference. And I love to ask people what was your biggest outlook change from the person that you were to the person you are now? What was like the biggest like mind blower for you that just shifted everything?
It's so good that you asked that, because what I was about to share based on what you were saying was exactly this thing. And you mentioned realizing, how many feelings are now accessible to us and all of that. The thing is, I didn't really know how to feel. I didn't know how to feel my feelings because I'd spent so long as a child and teenager being criticized and told that I was too much or too dramatic, or that my emotional responses were bluster, or that whatever it was not appropriate. And so I bottled everything up. And when I started doing this work in, I guess, this latter part of my journey, which I did for many years before I started working in it, I had a couple of sessions with the director, who was the coach at the time. And I walked into his office and sat down, and he said, "You strike me as the sort of person that would have your whole life scheduled from when you wake up to when you go to sleep." And I laughed and I said, "Absolutely, I do. Would you like to see it?" And he said a number of things to me. And one of them ultimately was, "When do you have time to feel your feelings?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to feel my feelings. I just want to get things done." And he made me feel so safe and seen in what he said to me. And he literally taught me how to feel my feelings, one session at a time. But it was that literally you are safe to feel your feelings here. They are welcome here. Everything. And it was coming from a man, first of all, which surprised me, and I wasn't expecting it, but coming from someone who basically, personal training background, kind of looks like a big gym bro. And he's the one that taught me how to feel my feelings, and in the full spectrum of them. And something that is what I've learned to be true is that if we try and avoid all of the perceived negative feelings, then we really mute our ability to feel the full spectrum of what we would interpret as positive feelings as well. And no feeling is really truly positive or negative. It's just the full spectrum of the human experience. And being able to feel my feelings and move through emotions in a really healthy and progressive, productive way has been life-changing, not just for me, but being able to teach my clients to do it. And also being the mother of a little boy, I find that it is so important because we have a real problem with men's mental health in this world, and that has a really huge flow-on effect. And so for me to now be able to teach a little boy who's going to grow up into a young man how to feel his feelings safely and productively, I think has been a game changer, not just for me, but for my whole direct family.
Yeah, that's amazing. I always speak about that same emotional scale of like, you can't only shut off one thing. All of your emotions are like a tap. If you shut it off, you shut everything down, which means if you don't want to feel your grief, you're also not going to feel your joy. There is no middle ground. There is no, oh, well, I just won't feel the bad stuff and I'll just feel the good stuff. That's not an option. And I think that's what so many people struggle with is they shut down the things that feel bad because they feel bad and because they're hard and they don't want to feel them, but they don't actually realize the damage that they're doing on the other end of the spectrum of, none of the good feels good anymore. And that's, it's literally where depression comes from, where you shut down all of those things to the point where you're just numb and you feel nothing because it feels safer for people to be in that space than to have that expression. And it's so interesting because we still live in a world where everyone talks about feeling feelings, but everyone is still super uncomfortable with people having feelings. There's a massive difference in if you can actually go and find somebody who you can feel your feelings with completely and wholly and safely, that is a rare find. And it's such an interesting thing because having gone through depression myself and grief and all of these different things, now I'm so open to people feeling their feelings. I'm like, it's exactly what you need to do. There's no other way to do it. You have to just feel everything. Just let it all out. It'll be fine. You want to come to my house and just scream off my balcony, do that. That's fine. I don't care. You want to come and cry. You want to come and, just laugh your head off. It doesn't matter. Whatever the emotion is, let's just feel it and do the thing. But it's such a rare feeling and such a rare space for people to be able to create in actually going through and giving people that space. So the fact that you had somebody on your journey who could create that space for you is absolutely incredible. And I love the fact that it was a man. I love a gym bro. That's so perfect for exactly what the world should be. That's where it should always be. And I think a question I always ask myself, we relocated, so we lived in the UK, we moved back to South Africa, and I've got my core friend group, but I'm looking to build a new group of friends, who are very aligned with the type of person I am. And I always look at that and I always think to myself, when I'm wanting to align with people and I'm wanting to make new friends and go into new spaces, there's such simple requirements, but they're so difficult to fulfill. So, people who can talk about their feelings, who can be really honest about what's going on for them and where they're at and what is happening in the world. People who talk about ideas rather than people. There's just these small things where you go through and you think, this is what I want. These are the people I want to surround myself with. And it's actually harder to find those people than you actually realize, even though everyone is talking about being those people. There's not many people who actually live as those people. I think that that's a big distinction in the world that we're in and the shift that's busy happening. The concept is there for a lot of people, but the actual embedded embodiment of it has not quite landed in the world that we live in. So I think that there's that beautiful gap of journey that's still happening in the kind of world that we're living in, which I think is really, really magical for where we are in the world. And
Absolutely.
I always
No,
like to, oh yeah, go for it. No, go for it, go for it.
I was sorry to interrupt. I was just recently having a conversation with someone where we were lamenting how on this journey of healing, we get to a point where small talk doesn't feel fulfilling anymore. And it can be really frustrating because suddenly you notice how the conversations around you are shallow and they are talking about people and events rather than ideas and possibilities. And we are really focused this year in my community on building the community further and having more opportunities for connection where feelings are welcome. And one of the things that I've found really important in that is that when someone cries, we don't offer them a tissue, because what you're then being told is that there is a feeling that you're having which is not welcome here. And the mind makes a connection and says, well, what other feelings then are not welcome?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's feelings are so complex. Like they're so complex. And one of the things that I really struggled with when I was going through my journey was feeling multiple things at the same time and not being able to cope with, but how can I feel all of these things at the same time? Not really realizing how complex we are as humans, and the fact that in one moment I can feel two completely opposing feelings. And, in my journey, we lost 5 family members all really close together. And in that process, obviously, there's so much grief, there's so much sadness. But at the same time, we were getting married. At the same time, like we were moving house. At the same time, like there were so many of these things that were supposed to be these joyous occasions. And we were just shutting down emotions from all angles. We were like, well, we can't feel too happy or too excited because this person's not here or these people aren't here, or like it would be rude to be that happy about like after something like this has happened. But then at the same time, oh well, we can't feel our grief. We can't, like we need to hold it together for everybody else. Like I think everybody in the family was holding it together for somebody else, and nobody was being honest about the fact that all of us were feeling absolutely terrible. Like it was such an interesting dynamic of emotions to try and like muster through and figure out, and just feel like it was so wild. And the moment that I realized, like, as a human, I can feel two things and that's absolutely fine, everything changed. Like, I was like, oh, whoa, like I can do all of these things and I can be the full expression of myself that I need to be. And there's nothing right or wrong about any of those feelings. I think that that's the key thing you said earlier. Like feelings are not fundamentally good or bad. Feelings are just an expression of what is going on in that moment. And they're so fleeting. Like you can travel from the very deepest, darkest, worst feeling that anyone could ever feel in their life all the way up to elation in such a short space of time if you understand how to feel your feelings. Like there's there's just like such magic in it. And like I always like to ask people like you obviously went from where you were to where you are now from a work point of view, like going through learning the health coaching and then like getting clients and now building a community and like doing all of these things, obviously step by step. Hilariously, you've already said like you felt like a fraud partway through that journey, probably for most of the journey, because as you're learning, you're teaching, and that's just how we do it in the entrepreneurial space. So if anyone feels like a fraud while running their own business, welcome to the company. It's exactly how it should feel. You're doing fine. But there's this like really big thing of like finding your purpose, like going on the journey, finding your purpose, starting the work. Like, what was that journey like for you?
Oh my goodness. All of the things you just said. I felt like a fraud. I felt like I was doing my soul work. I felt like there was a reason for me to be here. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And I felt for a long time, because of my self-doubt and my ingrained conditioning around criticism and things like that, that I would never make it. And something that was really pervasive actually was this generational story that was passed on, where it was not possible to have a creative vocation that brought in an income, because that was the reality for my parents, or my mum and my stepdad actually. And what I found really interesting about undoing some of that conditioning was that I found along the way some really, really deep-seated other generational patterns that were wrapped up in that I had to heal in order to unravel the whole thing. And so not only was I exhausted from this like constant intense period of healing one thing after another, but I also was trying to figure out how to run a business. And as you can imagine, that felt like a lot. And so what I've learned is that we never feel actually ready, and we are always still doing the work, even if we are then, as you said, teaching as we're learning. And when I started to learn, I throw in a few other little modalities in there along the way. I learned a bit more about my own human design. I realized that, in fact, that learning and then teaching is part of my fundamental makeup, and that I'm, by design, pardon the pun, here to teach people about what I've learned through my own transformation. And not only that, but without knowing it, my mother actually named me after the Celtic goddess of transformation, Cerridwen, which is my full name. And so if people lean to the spiritual or more woo-woo side of things, there are so many glimmers that connect in order to put me on the path of where I am today, that you can't really deny that obviously this is what I'm supposed to be doing. However, because of the conditioning that I had in the first 25 years of my life, like, I was the one that had the most doubt about that. I was the one that had to undo all of the just almost physically restricting story that I had, that I would never be successful, that I would never amount to anything. And so I think if I could say one thing is the most important thing in this journey, it would be working on your own self-acceptance and self-confidence and self-love in order to have self-belief. Because the self-belief piece is so instrumental. There are people out there who have no business doing what they're doing, but they believe in themselves so much that they're doing it, and good for them. But there are many people out there who are absolute masters of their craft that have no self-belief to carry that, and that is a real shame, because their magic is so needed. And so I think that the self-belief piece is really what a lot of people are working through, and honestly is some of the deepest, hardest work that you'll have to do.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, every level of healing that you do will bring you back face to face with that belief and that self-acceptance. And like, as I've gone through this journey, I'll be like, oh yeah, I feel really good about myself, I know who I am, I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm going. And then like 3 weeks later, I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Like, literally world is falling apart again, and I'm just like, what is happening? Like, I thought I had this down, I thought I knew what I was doing. And then it'll be, and every time, like, it's quicker to get back on track. Like, before, I'd be off track for like ever. And then obviously it gets quicker and quicker, but it still happens. Like, it still happens where I'll literally be sitting there and I'll be like, I've run a successful business for years now. I have helped loads of people, run international events, like run a podcast, like, and then I'll be sitting there and being like, I don't even know how to talk to people. It's like your brain does the wildest things every time you push up to a new barrier. Those same fears will come back, and you have to work through them at a different level. And the same doubts, the same questions that you ask yourself, the beliefs that you have, like, if they're that ingrained, you will deal with them multiple times. It won't be like just oh yeah, I've dealt with that, it's over and done with. Like, it's such an interesting kind of like process to go through. So tell me then, if somebody is going through this journey of healing, and if you want to speak specifically from the start of your journey, like that drug addiction and moving like through, like, what would your advice be for somebody if they're sitting in that same place you were and they're not sure where to go, they're not sure how to move, they're not sure like what steps to take? What would you say to somebody as the starting point?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I've had this conversation with many clients, and from all different spectrums, whether they've been, men who are experiencing homeless and drug and alcohol abuse, or people who are, quite well off and have, this hidden secret. everyone starts in the same spot, which is you need to first realize that you deserve better and that it's up to you to do it. You mentioned, radical self-responsibility earlier, and I think it can be really difficult to not feel in that moment that I'm here because of my circumstances, or I'm here because of, the other people around me, or, my genetics or my family upbringing, all these things. And ultimately, they may have had an impact, but we choose whether it continues to make an impact or not. And it's a really bitter pill to swallow. So first, knowing that you deserve better, knowing that you do deserve better, and making the conscious choice to just take the one next step towards whatever that is. And sometimes it's just about making the tiniest little steps each day in one direction and going as slow as you need to, as long as you don't stop. And being aware that the healing journey is not linear. But if you just commit to not stopping, doesn't mean you won't go backwards. It doesn't mean you won't fall down and have to get up. But if you just keep coming back to, no, I deserve something better than this, then ultimately you'll get there.
Amazing. Amazing. I love that. I think it's exactly that, isn't it? Just one step in front of the other. It's going to be hard, but if you can commit to one step in front of the other, like you'll get to somewhere else. And sometimes you get to somewhere else and you realize that that somewhere else is still not where you want to be. Which is, a story I hear very often from a lot of people. You have this idea of like, oh yeah, this thing will fix all the problems, and then you get there and it doesn't. And that's also fine. Like that's also part of the journey. And I always think like you can't jump from nothing to everything all in one go. So if you think, and like if we use your journey as like an exact example, like when you were in that, dream job in inverted commas, like sitting in that place and thinking I'm still not fulfilled, and then you move to do the next thing, that next thing you couldn't have done as the party girl living in Melbourne. Like you couldn't have made that step because it was too far a step. So it's like one step at a time. You have to go through that process. And then each one of those steps makes you more ready for the next step and more able to go through and say, oh, actually, okay, yes, this is where I want to be, and this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to show up, and this is who I want to be in the world. And you go through each of those like little incremental moments. But it's not a case of just like one day you're here and the next day, like that overnight success, next day you're suddenly done your healing completely fine. Everything's, working exactly as you wanted to. It just isn't possible. And I think like so many people don't understand that it is small, incremental, long, like go on the journey. Like, and you always hear people say like these quotes of like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And before I went on a healing journey, I was always like, I don't really get what that's all about. Like, of course it's about where you're going. Like it's of course it's about the end thing that you want. But actually, the more that I went on this healing journey, the more that I realized that actually the destination doesn't really matter. Like whether I end up, in South Africa or in the UK or running my own business or working for somebody or married or not married or with kids or without kids, like the actual end point doesn't matter because everyone's end point is a different, everyone's aiming for a different thing. Everyone wants a different outcome. Everyone wants it, for some people, my life would be their absolute worst nightmare. And for other people, they look at me like an aspiration of exactly how they want to live their lives. Like it's just the thing we have to realize. So when we're going on this journey, it's so important to have those incremental steps and slowly start to figure out like what is it that I actually want, and then be really open with yourself as well that you won't know until you're there. So if you get there and it's still not what you want, that's okay. Just
Exactly. And I think one of the most interesting things about life is that if you really, really trust that life is happening for you rather than to you, you find the way that things connect looking back and realize that there is no possible way that they could have gone in any other way, because it wouldn't have brought you to where you are today. And that's really beautiful. And one of the hardest things, but the most freeing things, is cultivating that trust in life to just take you where you need to be, so that you stop resisting it and feeling resentment for the things that are or are not happening for you, and just enjoy the ride.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay, so my final question is always for all of our guests, what is your next level of healing? So, as we've said, healing is not linear, it's a little bit all over the place, and there's always something that we're looking to grow into. So, what does that look like for you?
I love this because I always have some kind of healing and growth journey. One of my core values is evolution. And so I think that it's just something that I'm wired to do. As I mentioned, it's in my human design as well. So that's probably it. In 2025, I'm writing a book, and the creative journey of sharing some of these stories that I've shared with you today, I know will take a whole new level of healing for me. I have fear of judgment in one of my generational patterns, which obviously is going to come up writing. Imposter syndrome, I'm sure there'll be another level of that. Just the creative work in itself and having ADHD and being committed to finishing a project, I think is very challenging in itself. And also, my little boy is currently, as we speak, he's 16 months old this week. So being a parent to a toddler who is having all of the feelings, in itself is learning. I also think, as you mentioned, like being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, that also requires, different levels of growth and healing. And so I think that with all of those things, that's probably enough for a minute. Looking forward to the rest
Absolutely.
of the end.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, writing a book is one of the most incredible things that I think you can do as part of your healing journey. Like speaking about your healing journey, doing podcasts, doing interviews, going through that process. Like there's something so healing in just going through and cataloging and looking at what you've done and how you've done it and where you've come from and what that all looks like. So I think that that is absolutely spectacular. And then obviously my whole platform is all about sharing the journey so other people don't have to struggle as we have. So, writing a book and having that available to people is just, it's such an incredible thing and such a kind gesture to the world as well. So I think that that's, absolutely beautiful. Um, Okay, I mean, yeah, I could literally talk to you for years. I absolutely love this, but I think we're gonna have to wrap up the interview because otherwise we'll go on forever. But it's been such an absolute privilege to hear your story, to go through this, like to just be able to share another dynamic of healing with everyone that listens to the podcast. So just thank you so much for coming on, for being so open and honest. Like we really, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I likewise would be happy to carry on for a good long time. I just probably would need a cup of tea. But I feel very humbled, especially, when you say sharing your journey is a gift with the world. I really, really hope that people receive that, because I just did in a big way. So thank you. But if other people do and realize that, finding the people who can hold your story and can hold your feelings in the way that they deserve will really, really changed the dynamic of not just your healing, but your living as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love it so much. So as always, we will put Instagram, contact details, all that good stuff below the podcast so people can reach out. When the book is ready, they can come over and buy the book and get involved with your story even more, which I think is absolutely incredible. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for listening to another inspiring episode of The Diary of Discovery. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends, family, or anyone else you think might benefit from the stories of hope and transformation. Your feedback means the absolute world to us, so please take a moment to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your reviews help us to reach even more listeners and continue to bring this meaningful content to the world. Until next time, remember, your healing journey is valid. You are never alone, and you have the strength to get through this. Keep shining bright, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Diary of Discovery.